All right, good morning, everyone. We are now recording, and this is going to be a webinar that is going over how to store grades for third 9 weeks. I do want to preface that the information you're going to see today comes from a sandbox of fictional data. So no student names that you see are real students anywhere, and any likeness to any real person is purely coincidental because we do not want to share any personally identifiable information on any real student and violate FERPA in any way. So again, welcome. So it is third 9 weeks or approaching third 9 weeks for the majority of the state. As you approach third 9 weeks, we must know that storing grades is again a process we need to go through if we want to get stored grades onto our report cards, if we want to run honor rolls and things such as that. So I have shared in the chat a link that takes you to this Word document. And I've referred to this document each time when it comes time to store grades because it helps us to wrap our heads around the length of a term of a class and the buckets within those lengths of terms that we would want to store for. So it is toward the end of, well, it's the beginning of March now, and most districts, it's usually around mid-March that that third quarter hits. So for example, you can see in my diagram here, and this is a screenshot of the final grade reporting term setup that every school in the district has to set up. So in elementary schools, typically when it comes to the layers of this pyramid, you're only going to see the year long because most classes in elementary schools are year long classes. Now, they'll probably still have the quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 buckets because you give those grades even in the year long classes, but that's the only tier of this pyramid you will see. Majority of times in middle schools, you'll probably see a year long and the semesters because sometimes you have some electives or exploratory classes, sometimes middle schools call them, that will actually change in December for students. So you might see down to a semester level. And then at some high schools, you will see it, most high schools will even go down to a semester level, but you will also have some that will also go down to a quarter level if they're like a traditional block school that might have 9 weeks courses. I know government and econ are very typical ones that you'll see in a 9 weeks length of class. So what we have to think about are all of the classes that kids are in and whether they are ending or not when it comes to the end of this March period. So how much information you have to enter on that stored grade screen is going to depend on two things. One, how far down your pyramid goes, and two, what bucket is relevant for that point in time inside of that pyramid. So I need to think about March. I need to think about mid March. And so in my setup here, because I happen to build my years and terms out to quarter 3, you can see that my end of my third 9 weeks ends March 13th. So I need to be able to know what I need to do if it is March 13th right now and grades have all been entered by all teachers and I'm ready to go in and capture those grades and actually store them to the historical grades screen. So first, let's take our year-long classes. So any classes that are year-long in length, the only grade bucket that is relevant in quarter 3 is the actual Q3 bucket. So you're going to see it here in purple. At that point, that grade is just an in-progress grade for quarter 3. It is not a final grade in a year-long class. There is going to be no credit awarded in a year-long class for quarter 3. So when I go to my stored grades page, when I go to store for my year-long class for the Q3 bucket, it's not going to be stored with any credit, and I have to keep that in mind. If I have semester length classes, so these are classes students started in January, they will finish in May. Again, in those classes, I have a quarter 3 bucket because third 9 weeks falls in that time frame. But quarter 3 again is just an in progress grade. Students have not finished a class at the end of quarter 3 if it's a semester length class. So again, when I go to store for that semester length class, I will not be awarding credit on that particular bucket for this length of class. The majority of the work is going to come if you do have 9 weeks courses. If you have kids who take courses that are 9 weeks in length, so in other words, they started this course in January and they completely finished this course in March, could be, like I said, a government econ class, a health class, some driver's ed classes are 9 weeks, then this is where your work comes in. Because in this length of class, so this January to March class, I'm going to say it's a government class, we'll say. In my setup, they have a quarter 3 grade, an exam grade, and those two will average to give me a final overall grade for this class. Now, this is in my setup. A lot of districts don't separate the quarter and the exam. They build the exam in as a category, which is perfectly fine. There are options here. And so if you do that, then you don't have any other buckets here other than an F1. So you might see multiple buckets in your pyramid in quarter 3 or any of your quarters, and you might just see a final grade. So if you do see the multiple buckets, then again, when we go to store for quarter length classes, quarter 3, that Q3, is still just an in progress grade. No credit awarded in that Q3 grade. X1 is an exam grade. It factors into the overall grade, but it does not count as a credit bearing grade. So storing again without credit. However, this F1 is our designation for final grade. So however you have your F1 set up, whether it's just taking in all the category information or it is combining two little buckets like I have here, this grade is reflective of the finality of that course. So when I store the F1s only for quarter length classes, because F1 has not hit here or here. That doesn't hit until May for these buckets. But this bucket of F1, because it's at the end of this course, will be stored with credit. So this is the one that always kind of trips people up. So we want to make sure to go through that together. And so I always at the beginning of the year highlight my buckets that are relevant to each point in time. And you'll notice I kind of made a chart. Who stores without credit for every bucket that is relevant for this March time frame, and who stores with credit, because this is going to relate to that stored grades page that we go work on. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to minimize it. And let's go take a look at our stored grades table. So, or excuse me, at our stored grades process. Remember, storing grades has to be done at the actual school level. So I'm going to flip over to the high school. And we're going to go to the stored grades screen. So to find that, we go under Setup to System. And under Grades, you see our link for Permanently Store Grades. So this is the action that goes through and allows us to take those grades out of the teacher gradebook and actually move them to the historical grades page for students. This is when it becomes stored, locked, and so forth. So in this page, we've said it in other trainings and other webinars, it can be an overwhelming page because there's lots of options. But the majority of these options we don't work with in Alabama. We do pretty much the bare bones of all of this. So the first thing that you have to decide when you're coming to the stored grades page is what bucket of grades do you want to work with first. So when I say that bucket, again, I'm going back to this document of these right here. So in my quarter 3, I'm going to need to work with Q3, X1, and F1. In the way that I think about it, I always start with the least bucket first, the one that I call the lowest. It might be have the most data, but it like I want to work my way toward the bigger bucket. So I'm going to start with quarter 3. So looking at my chart, quarter 3 is going to apply to all 3 lengths of my classes in that pyramid. So the first, which grades are we going to use for the final reporting term? Notice this is going to list all of the buckets you have in that pyramid. So quarter 3 is the first bucket I want to grab from the pyramid. Now the next box says, yes, you are pulling quarter 3, but what would you actually like to store it as over in historical grades? Because believe it or not, you can store with different labels than what you have in your pyramid if you want to. And we have people who do that sometimes with F grades, and that's perfectly fine. But in this case, it's going to be a one-to-one match. I want to pull my quarter 3 grades out of the grade book, and I actually want them to store as a quarter 3 grade. So I put Q3 in both areas. All right, the next section is to include or exclude class enrollments. And this is the one, if you don't get it right, can cause issues. So if you were to not act, and I know that the first year that we were in PowerSchool, a lot of people stored and they did not do anything in this area right here, and we saw lots of issues with data on student records. It will store anything and everything that was associated with the student if you do not go into this area and make a decision. So most of us across the state have students that we have to change their schedule on at some point in time. If you drop a student from a class and they have any grades ever associated with that class and you don't check a box here, it's going to store all of those grades, even if it wasn't the final grade or the true end of quarter grade for these kids. So I want you to think about in January, it's a new semester. You did a lot of movement on your kids. So let's say a student was scheduled for fourth block algebra, okay? Fourth block algebra. And they were in that class for 2 days. But the teacher decided to give them a syllabus and said, hey, if you take your syllabus home and get it signed, then I'm going to go ahead and put you a grade of a classwork grade of 100 out of 100. And we're going to start your grade off strong. Well, then on day 2, you find out the student made the baseball team. And so you've got to move his algebra class to first period because he's now got to have fourth period baseball. So you drop that class and you move them to the first period class. But that teacher entered that grade for that syllabus, so technically that student has a 100 in that algebra class. Well, then they rock on the rest of quarter 3 in that first period algebra class and they get a grade as well. If you don't come in here and select a box in this include exclude statement, both of those grades are going to store, and now the kid has 2 algebra 1 grades. And the counselors are going, well, which one is correct? Which one do we delete? Can we delete the other one off? Well, one, we don't want you to have to delete anything off. We would like you to have it where it just stores the correct one to begin with. So in order to make that happen, you can use one of these 3 statements. You can say exclude enrollment of records with a student enrolled in the class after this date. So say I only want to get kids who enrolled after whatever date you want to choose in the class. Exclude enrollment records where the student dropped the class before this date, so you can eliminate those drops. Or the one that I personally recommend that I know does it in the same fashion that it used to do it automatically and I now is the include only enrollments. Include only enrollment records that are currently active and were active on this date. So this says, hey, PowerSchool, take all the kids who are in these classes right now and are in there as of this date. And the date that I always tell people to look at is look at the end of your 9 weeks. In your school calendar, truly, like your school calendar, when do you have your third 9 weeks to end? I always tell them take that date and back it up 4 days. So if my end of my calendar is March 13th, then I'm going to check this box, and it's very important. Check it. Don't just put a date in here. I'm going to come here and take March 13th and back it up 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to say March 9th. So I'm going to say any kid who was in any of my classes as of March 9th, I want you to go grab whatever's in that grade book and I want you to store it for that kid. That way, any kids that you made a lot of schedule changes at the first of the 9 weeks do not get stored with the one that they're in actually at the end of the course. This is very much what iNow used to do for us when you posted grades, for those of you who are with us in the iNow years. So that is always my recommendation for everyone. Every time we do these stores is to do the include and pick a date that's a few days before the end of the 9 weeks. If you have additional filters that you need to place on students, I will tell you typically in third 9 weeks, you're not going to do any additional filters. Now, when we talk about fourth 9 week storing, we will hit this section hot and heavy because I know there are a ton of schools who like to store senior grades early because seniors sometimes get out 2 weeks before the rest of the school. They finish up so everything can be finalized for graduation. And I can show you exactly how you'll need to do that come fourth 9 weeks. So that will be a hot topic there. But if you did need to store for a select student, a select group of students, or a specific section, because how many times have you had it where a teacher comes in after you've stored grades and says, oh, I forgot to put this test grade in on these students, so I need to have you unlock my grade book so I can put it all in and let you restore my section. You can just lock it down to that one section and just restore those grades and not restore the entire school. You can store by grade level, track, or certain exit dates. But we're not going to need any of this right now. This is the end of third quarter, and I want to go grab everybody in the school and store. So I'm just going to minimize that option right there, because the three big things you need are the bucket, the include, and then this area right here. And again, this is the one that's a little tough for us to kind of understand. Classes by term length and what you want to do. So when I look at this classes by term length, it's going to pull any level of your pyramid that is current as of your dates in your pyramid. So as of today's date, so right now today's date is March 2nd. All of these terms in that period are active during March 2nd. Now, it is very important to know that it carries them as being active for 30 days beyond that activation. So for example, quarter three displays right here because it's currently active. Quarter three runs from January 4th to March 13th. March 2nd falls in that time frame. This will stay on this list for 30 days past this date right here. On day 31, this is going to disappear. It doesn't mean you can't get back to it, but it's not going to stay on there automatically. You would have to click this button right here and it will show you every bucket or every term that you have anywhere in your build. But if you would like to see it as clean as possible, stay within a 30-day window of when your 9 weeks end so that this can be true. Okay, it just helps you out in the long run. So people who like to wait a long time to store, it just means you have a little more thought to put into what displays right here. So here's where we need to look at our diagram here for our length and what we need to do. So keep in mind, we selected Q3 as the bucket we're working with. Yes, we're going to have to work with X1 and F1, but not right now. So for Q3, what lengths does it appear in? Well, it appears in year-long classes here. It appears in semester length classes here, and it appears in quarter three classes here. So I am going to need to make sure I do something with it in every length. What is it I need to do? Do I need to store it without credit or do I store it with credit? Well, we already said Q3 is an in progress grade, and so that's why I have it in the column to store without credit all three times. So let's minimize this again. And notice this matches up perfectly. So for my year-long classes, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say store with no credit. For my semester length classes, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say store with no credit. I'm going to come to my quarter three length class. That's that little bucket, that little part of that pyramid. And I'm going to say store with no credit. So having that diagram really helps you understand how to fill this part of this page out. Okay. The other thing that you might need to consider is, do you have classes that are enrolled at other schools? For example, do you do remote enrollments within your district? Okay, this is not cross LEA or grades into, coming from another district. This is within your district. Do you have a CTE center in your district that kids from your high school are enrolled in and you do it through remote enrollments? Do you have an alternative school inside of your district where students take classes at the alternative school and you have them in there through remote enrollments? Some other examples, there's the virtual school setup that you might have inside of your district that you have kids remote scheduled into classes. If you do anything with remote types of enrollments, this is how you would choose how those grades are stored. Because, for example, I am at my high school. I do have an alternative school here, but the kids are enrolled at the high school and remote enrolled into the classes. So as I am storing for the high school, I'm going to tell PowerSchool, hey, For all of my kids enrolled here at the high school, I want you to store grades for classes they're enrolled at all of the schools they're enrolled at. Or I could choose this school only. So if I want the alternative school to store their own grades, you can do that as well. But you can grab them all here and make it a lot easier. So I'm going to say all schools, and then you have to decide what name do you want to go on that transcript record. Do you want the name of this school or of the other school that it's actually earned at? I'm going to choose the other school because if they're at the alternative school, I want it to have the alternative school name. You have your district policy of which one it should be, so just make the appropriate choice there. And guys, that's it. All of this other stuff is stuff you can use, but we really don't use. Everything is preset to go. We're storing both potential and earn. That's the only thing. If that wasn't there, that can mess you up. These are just options. So we have everything set correctly that we need to get that Q3 grade for my year long, my semester, and my quarter length classes. So now I'm going to scroll to the bottom of this page and I'm going to click submit. And it's going to go through and it's going to tell me 100 students have been processed and 221 grades have been stored. So 221 Q3 grades are now inside of PowerSchool for my students. So that gets Q3 over on your historical grades screen. Now, that's just one bucket. Remember that in my diagram here, I have 3 buckets that I have identified within here. So I start with what I call the least in level and I move my way up. So the next one I need to work on is X1. And X1 only appears in that Q3 length. So there is no X1 that I need to touch for year long or semester. So that means I need to run through this process again. So I'm going to come back to System. I'm going to scroll back to the permanently stored grades page and start all over. So now I swap my buckets. What bucket do I want to work with this time? X1. What do I want to store this bucket as? I want to keep it X1. Again, I need to use my include and exclude statements just as I said earlier, and I'm going to use the exact same thing. When you're storing within that same time frame, you need to use the same date range right here and make sure you make note of that date because if you ever have to restore, you want to make sure the parameters are all the same so you restore the exact same data. Excuse me. So that's why I always do the recommendation of doing 4 days prior. That way everybody has a count and doesn't have to remember a date. So again, I'm going to come in here, and that was the 9th was the date that I used. And again, if you needed additional filters, you could use them. If not, you come down here and your next spot is the classes by term length. So again, looking at this document, just like to go back and forth. For year long, do nothing with X1. So that's going to be the do not store option. Semester 2, it does not appear, so I'm not going to do anything with semester 2 classes. But for Q3 classes, X1 is just a bucket that I need to use to calculate a final. So I need to store it, but it does not receive credit. So store without credit. So if I come back here, again, year long, X1 is not being touched here, so I leave it do not store. Semester 2, X1 is not being stored here, so I leave it do not store. But Q3, absolutely, I want to get that final exam in there, so I'm going to store it, but no credit. Same options here. I want to store for all classes they're enrolled at any school, and I want it to be the name of the other school. So I come to the bottom, and I click Submit. I will tell you in my sandbox, we've not entered any final grades yet because technically I'm a little early in showing this demo, but you get the idea. It would go through and tell you how many students were processed and how many grades were stored, and you would have that X1 final grade then listed for all of your students. Now I go back to my little diagram. So I've taken care of Q3 grades, I've taken care of X1 grade, and I've taken care of the now I've got to take care of the F1 grade. And just like earlier, the F1, I only want to take care of it for the Q3 length classes that actually have ended. I don't want to give a final grade for some year-long class that doesn't end until May. I don't want to give it for some semester length class that doesn't end in May. I only want to give it for the classes that ended here in March, those Q3 length. So we're going to wash, rinse, and repeat one more time. Come back to System under Setup. go back to permanently stored grades, and I'm going to change the bucket to now say F1. And again, I want that to be the same bucket that I store with, a final grade. I also want to include, as of my date on March 9th, the same thing I'm using for my other buckets for this point in time. And then I'm going to come and again match that picture that I just showed you up with this. So we said for year-long classes, nope, I do not want to touch the final grade for year-long because it's not final yet. I do not want to touch the grade for semester 2 because, again, it's not final until May. But for that quarter 3 length class that ends on March 13th, absolutely I want the final grade on it. And this time, this is the grade bucket that we in our school decide gets the credit. So I'm going to say store with credit. And when you do decide to store with credit, you must state how much credit to award. So in this case, we award all of it because they're finished with the course, and we do it as 100%. Same thing down here for my classes enrolled. I want all schools and the other school. And once I come here and hit submit, and again, I don't have any quarter length classes in here with grades, it would tell you though that you had this many students processed, this many grades updated, and this many grades inserted. And that is all that you would need to do to get your grades stored for third quarter. So there's the process top to bottom. So now let's talk about what are some things that you might need to check that can cause havoc in the stored grades process. Well, there is one type of error on students that can cause your permanently stored grades to not actually store for a student. And sometimes in classes, when you have a student with this error, it can affect the whole class, and that entire class will not store. So I always have one suggestion that I give to districts before they actually go to this process. There's a report. If you go under reports and system reports, now, depending on your security access, you might not see everything I'm showing here, but hopefully you see the one that I'm going to show you. If you scroll down to the, whoops, a little too far, membership and enrollment area, there are a set of reports, a school enrollment audit and a section enrollment audit. And I can't say this enough in any webinar that I'm on. I recommend as best practice that you run these reports every month and clean any errors up you see on them, because these reports will cause havoc in other processes inside of PowerSchool. These are so important that there is a plugin actually out there in PowerSource that will put these in a little yellow box at the top of your start screen to let your counselors, registrars, whoever you need to see it, know that, hey, there's a section enrollment error. So section enrollment audit is something you definitely need to check as you store grades or before you store grades, because if anybody has enrollment audit errors, it won't store on those kids. This report will show lots of things. One, it will show you any student you have enrolled in your school, but you have no classes scheduled for them. That's an issue because every kid should be in classes. Now, again, this is sandbox data. I got a lot of kids that I don't really have scheduled because we just play with a subset of kids. But what you really want to look at, I'm going to scroll to the bottom, are these kinds of errors. Students who have course date misalignments. So what this means is you've enrolled a student on a certain date, but you say that their class enrollments start on another date. And y'all, this happens all the time because you get busy in the school. I want you to think, because I know I've got probably a lot of counselors on here. How many times have you had a student to come enroll? So let's say it's October 1st and you get a new student and they come to enroll, and it's crazy busy in your office. So you don't have time to get in PowerSchool to schedule them. You just like hand schedule. Here are the classes you're going to go to. Here, babe, go on to go to class. Teachers, I will get them put in PowerSchool tomorrow when I get through with whatever it is I'm doing. So you've enrolled them in PowerSchool as of 10/1, and then it's like 2 days later before you actually get to put their schedule in, and you forget to change the date of the enrollment on the schedule to be that original day. So now there's a gap. You're saying, hey, they started school on 10/1, but they didn't start their classes till 10/3. That's an issue. That will cause issues with attendance calculations, and it will cause issue with storing grades. So if you have any students that have course date misalignments, you need to fix those before you store grades. Again, it's always best to kind of look at this monthly, weekly, however you want to see if you have any errors and get those clean. So notice I have an error right here. On this one, I have this student, Isaac, and here is his enrollment date. It says he enrolled into school on August 19th. But when I look at the courses I enrolled him in, well, I enrolled him in driver's ed and I enrolled him on August 10th. How can he be in a class on a date before he was actually enrolled in the school? You would need to decide which one's got the mistake. Did he actually start school on the 10th and you just put the wrong enrollment date on the record, or did he start on the 19th and you put the wrong date on the section enrollment? You'll have to figure out, whoever did the scheduling, which one is the correct date and correct any of those that are wrong. So same thing right here. I've got this student who enrolled on 8/26, but when I enrolled him in the classes, I put 8/10. Need to fix that. So hopefully you won't have many of those in there, but you need to lay eyes on those and get those fixed before you go in to store grades. All right, somebody just said, can you walk me through how you would fix this? Absolutely. So let's take this student right here, the Acevedo student. So we know that on this record, and I'll show you, let me copy their student number. I'm going to scroll back and just pop open another tab. And I'm going to search this student. Okay, there's the student, so I'm going to go into the record. I want to show you where these numbers are pulling from and how you'll fix them. So when I come down here to the transfer info screen, I think everybody's familiar with this screen right here, you'll see the entry date. This is the date the student enrolled into this school. So it's on 8/26/2022. So if that's the date they physically started the school or virtually, however they're attending, that's going to be the date their classes need to start. So what I have to do is come over here, and I like to go to the all enrollments page. Okay, here are their classes. So notice this is one that was in the list. See if I go back to the conflicts, let's scroll back to the bottom. It says driver's ed is an issue. Got them starting on 8/10. And sure enough, if I look right here, it says driver's ed started on 8/10. Well, they can't start a class before they were enrolled. So what I have to do is over here on the right, there's an edit button. You come over here to edit and you change that 8/10 to 8/26 and you submit. And so now, see if it works. I'm going to come back here to my system reports. I'm going to rerun this report, see if it removes that class. So scroll down to my membership section enrollment audit. It's loading. Scroll to the bottom. Whoops. Seems like I still have an issue, so I'd have to go through and look and see what else might be causing that issue. And it could be that these end dates. So if their last date here is the 16th, what should be the last date here? So, and there could be some other issues with that record. But that is how you would need to go through in there. Somebody said, will it erase any of the other grades you had previously stored? No, it will not. Not at all. These right here, just it causes it from being able to go in the first time altogether. And it could be that if you didn't pay attention to these reports, that some grades had not stored on these kids. So I'd highly recommend going into their record and actually checking to see if they had grades in those other buckets. And if you hadn't laid eyes on them, you might notice that they're missing. So just keep that in mind. And somebody said, show one more time how to pull that section enrollment report. Absolutely. So it's under system reports. And when you come to system reports, you're going to scroll down, and you probably don't see all those health reports if you're not a nurse. But in this membership and enrollment area right here, it's these two reports right here. They can cause issues with things, so I always recommend running them. And like I said, there's actually a plugin that you can have your tech person to install that anytime a person lands on these reports, it actually, and I don't have it installed here, it will put a little yellow box like when you first log into PowerSchool, and it'll say, hey, Acevedo has an issue with their enrollment on this date and this date. You need to go fix it. And so it kind of lets you know in real time. It is in PowerSource. Kind of knew y'all would ask that. And let's see if I can find it real quick. On your tech directors and PowerSchool administrators are going to have access to this website. Let's see if I can find it off the top of my head because I don't remember the exact name, but it is a start screen. This is it, start page alerts. So I'll show you the picture. This is what it'll do. So it will tell you, it also does a lot of other stuff. Like it'll tell you if a kid is missing phone numbers or email addresses or global IDs or some of the stuff inside there. It's very customizable. But I believe it gives any errors on all this. So missing class enrollments, class date misalignments, missing state ID. So it actually tells you quite a few other stuff as well. So I'm going to throw this link in chat in case y'all want to give this to your tech person and you don't have this kind of alert box that can help you with those. That way you don't have to go run that report every time. You'll see it in real time, day to day. Just another thing to kind of be helpful to make us aware of any mistakes that might have happened inside of PowerSchool. Real great. So you want to run that before you store. And then after you store, what are some things that you want to do after you store? Well, you might want to go through and see, do you have any null grades? Did you have anybody who didn't put a grade in, or did you accidentally forget to click on that homeroom class to not store grades, or in some of those other classes? Because, you know, null grades can mess with honor roll. So you might want to go and have your tech director to go through and find your null grades and delete those out. Now, I'll tell you, I have directions on those. I don't share them with everybody because it is a DDA process. For those who need it, I have it out there on YouTube. Just send me an email and I can send that link to you on how to do that. There's also a set of Power Tool reports that sometimes are very helpful. So if you go to Setup in System, there is a link under Data Management called Power Tools. Some people have access and some don't, so you may or may not have this. It would just depend. But I'll show you what kind of tools are here as well. My server is being just a little bit buggy right now. Well, what is going on? Let's see if I can get it to work. I'm not sure what's going on. Something happened to the plugin. Try it again. System, Power Tools. There we go. All right, so there are different tools right here, and there are some miscellaneous tools that will help you in grading. So I can see blank stored grades. Those are those nulls that we were talking about, where you might have a class that you don't issue grades in and it actually stored a record. Your best practice is if you have classes that are filler classes that you're not awarding the grades in or doing anything with grading in, those sections really need to be marked to not store grades so they don't produce these blank grades for you to begin with. You can look for duplicate stored grades. So let's say you didn't get the right cutoff date on those kids. This report right here will tell you if you have students who have duplicated grades across the year. Now, we know we've got migrated data in. You don't want to look at all years. You just want to look at the current year when you're looking at this report. So this tells me that this student right here has multiple grades for this class right here. Now, that could be legit and it could not be legit. Sometimes we have classes that kids take more than one time, like maybe PE. Maybe you've got them in two different sections of a half credit of PE. So yes, you expect two separate grades to store because they're going to earn a half credit in this first period and a half credit in this fourth period. I don't know, for some reason that's just how it fit their schedule instead of doing a year-long class for a whole credit or something. Those are legit. But if you have a kid who's on a class that actually is stored twice, let's see if I can find one that would show. If a score is actually added twice in there, it would be, and so on this one right here, this geometry is tagging twice because it's stored once with the 91 and once with a null grade. So what I'm betting is this student was scheduled into a geometry class that didn't stay in long. The course was dropped, and then they were added into another section of it where they did get a grade, but because a course was dropped and the include and exclude wasn't used right, this happens. So people are like, how do I fix that? Well, you go in and delete them. Clearing the null grades will keep that out, but what if it had been the class that the teacher gave them the 100 for the syllabus? You would end up seeing a 91 and a 100 sitting here, and something's going on with credits. I got 2 credits, which I shouldn't have 2 credits, so I would need to do some digging into these grades. If I know that this is an issue and I shouldn't have this, I can go through here and sure enough, look, we got a credit being awarded potential here. I can just delete this out because I shouldn't have had that null record. So that cleans that up. That's a duplicated. That's going to need to be cleaned up as well. So the duplicate stored grades reports helps you find if any mistakes were made in stored grades that put extra things in there that shouldn't be there. So I'd always take a look at this report after you store grades and clean any necessary before you start printing report cards and progress reports and such. Another one could be incorrect stored grades. And this will be things where a grade is expected and it's not lining up with something. In this case, it says right here that I have a grade of 70, but the percent said 65. So why is there, because you know in PowerSchools, there's two separate fields for grades. And let's just go back to this student right here and click into this grade. There is a grade, which some people have letters in this area. And then there's the percent grade, which everybody has a numerical value. This percent one is the one GPA and all your calculations pull from. This says, hey, you've got a big discrepancy in what's in the percent and what's in the grade. Now, we do know teachers bump grades sometimes and help students out. Lay your eyes on this to say, is it okay to give a 5-point bump that they actually earned a 65, but you gave them a 70 as a grade? If it is a bump, they need to be bumped in both areas. And so that would help you with those mismatches inside of there. Now, if you're a district that has some special codes like the exemption code or the incomplete code, a lot of people put those in the grade and some put them again in the percent, or it's whatever percent you have tagged to that. You're going to see those in the list and you can ignore those. You really want to look at the ones that have the two dual grades because that's going to cause you an issue. If you left this like this, then a 70 is what they're going to see as a grade, but 65 is what's calculating for GPA and everything else, which could cause you some really big issues. And somebody just put in chat, where do you find the Power Tools option? Absolutely, can walk back through that. So that is going to be located under Setup. Here on the left-hand side, you go to System. And in this top area right here called Data Management is this Power Tools set of reports. And we were in this miscellaneous tools area. Ooh, can't talk today, y'all. And we have these different kind of grading reports. And just as a FYI, there's lots of different reports inside of here that people can use. I know a lot of PowerSchool administrators use these reports to find out things that have been orphaned or anything like that. So those are the things that I would say are very helpful in making sure that you did store properly and everything is good so you can have faith in what you actually print out on that report card. So those are kind of the big steps as far as it comes to storing grades. And once you go to store grades, you know, now if you need to, you can go run your honor roll report if you have honor roll set up. And remember, if y'all need any assistance with any of that, you can always reach out to me or one of the PowerSchool coaches. We do have on our Alabama PowerSchool site the video that we went through that showed how to set that up and how to run that report for everyone. So hopefully you found this informational. We've gone through all of the steps of it. So what I'm going to do now is stop the recording so the video can start rendering, and I'm going to open it up for any Q&A that y'all want to have in a not recorded session. So let me stop real quick.